We're good. You're good.
So starting now, I'm Joseph, and today we'll be talking about different countries and their work environments. So starting off, we can see that civilization began in one desert, in one single place in Mesopotamia, but eventually everybody spiraled out and then developed their own unique cultures and traits, and then entering into the modern world. As you can see, all of this vague nations were built on the idea of work and innovation. So this can obviously we're seeing these very stark contrasts, right? Them all being very similar and very incredible in how they can be advanced. So as we can see here, the idea of work is so ingrained into the culture and the cultures that within the stimulus, Richard Nixon said that the work ethic is ingrained within the American character, which of course comes into question how proficient are Americans actually, and of course in comparison to other nations, and then the quality and productivity of work is described within Adam Smith Wilson nations when discussing the idea of productivity and the idea of equal work. So, but unfortunately, I wanted to do the entire work, but that's improbable since it's a big place. So I decided to focus on the main countries with very distinct social contrasts, that being the United States, Japan, and Denmark. Now, these are all very productive countries, but we want to see the stark contrast and see what is best to find the ideal work environment. So starting off with the United States, it is acting as our baseline for American work as we know it because we live in America. It's necessarily built on from attainment and essentially independence of gaining it ever since the foundation of the country, being independent and going out. In fact, that idea of finding success, working hard, and getting satisfaction within America was so profound it was known as the American Dream, and you can see that within our culture in books such as Of Mice and Men and The Great Gatsby. However, art imitates life, and then we can see that it's very rare that people actually achieve that American dream in such manner, where it's actually happiness, and that leads to the other idea of capitalistic ideologies, which was developed since the beginning, where, as opposed to other countries, you can see that it's built on essentially getting others and finding success. You unfortunately, it leads to many class divisions and unhappiness between other people. And then this permeates into the modern age within entering corporate America, where we can see that there's near Darwinistic principles in a study by the cultural studies that found that there is a certain degree of feast or famine within corporate America. And then we can see that to survive and to prosper, you basically need to be innocuous and appear as innocent as possible before striking at the right time and being able to take someone else's power or position. And of course, this comes at the idea of us trying to ascend the corporate ladder and being the best and gaining that competitive advantage. However, that comes at the idea of the cost of ethics and morals. And of course, this spiraled and perpetuated until finally culminated within the early 2000s with the Enron Corporation, where it saw that the company itself, the majority of it, was trying to intentionally confuse shareholders and then just hide its unethical practices. So of course the idea shows this very large backlash between the rest of the population. So this comes into the idea of Darwinistic survival, while it's not entirely analogous in that there's outside factors that determine the company's success, and saying the workplace and the office was the environment and the workers are adapting and surviving, it just doesn't seem completely one-to-one in essentially how you can survive. So to survive and be able to succeed within corporate American culture, you need to be subtle and be innocuous, but you need to act within legal confines. Now, moving on to the opposite, we can see in Japan or the Nihon that there's a very stark contrast in how it survives. Essentially, that is very beginning with a history. Since the Meiji Restoration in the 19th century, you can see that Japan was able to drive innovation and drive globalization through industrialization, and that way it can develop into a very highly efficient and productive country. So we can see some similarities in its use of effectiveness. But essentially how the strong work ethic is ingrained is that the society itself and parents have a desire to work hard and then to provide for yourself and your family, so that way it drives innovation and it drives people to want to succeed. And then, so to do that, they analyze the idea of how highly efficient it is by a study by the American Marketing Association. It studied 50 Japanese firms and discussed the idea of quadrant analysis, where essentially the companies would fall in order of essentially four these corners. So essentially on one side you would see organic processes, or if roles and work would come organically or just fluidly, and as opposed to a very high order within mechanistic and highly structured. And then on the other side of the axis is if it was internal, it would exist very connectivity and have a lot of really have a very strong relationship and bond between workers, as opposed to external maintenance, which is driven by competition and essentially getting an advantage. So we can see that there was a clan which was very cohesive, familial bonding and developing loyalty, and then it was basically based around success in working together and like developing like a strong commitment. And then advocacy, which is essentially entrepreneurship through flexibility and development and spontaneity, while understanding and taking the idea of risk, so that way you can find success and essentially gamble. Then a more like developed and stronger hierarchy was found within a hierarchy where it was mainly structure and being able to have like a strong definition and define structure provides like stability and like predictability, so we can be able to develop a stronger and more concise profit, as opposed to a market which is centered around competition, developing achievement, so that way we can gain an edge not only to the competition but within the workers themselves on the same company. So while these are all very different and they could all have success, and found that a market culture had the most success, and that is because competition views a strong work ethic, meaning that since they'll get a satisfaction by setting goals and achieving them, that way that'll give them more impetus to work harder and then achieve more. And then of course, an additional facet of market cultures were that they're able to put customer interest first, so by that way making those strong connections within the relationship that can lead to like longer term profits and be able to have a better customer relation, which is additionally an important facet of working together. However, this comes at a cost, as we can see that the Japanese workers could be worked too hard, and within it there's a term called salary. It's translated to salaryman, where it just describes the standard work ethic of people in Japan. They can work upwards of nearly 50 to 80 hours a week, and they can be left fatigued and unhappy. So if you look at the World History Report, you can see like the most comprehensive way of describing a country's happiness. While America was able to make 14th, we can see that Japan ranked 51st, of course, seeing that the idea that they are totally left unhappy. And then what we can also see is that within the top 10, there's 6 of them are Scandinavian countries, which come to our last one, which is Denmark. Now, ever since the beginning of socialism within the rise of Europe and then within the 1800s, Denmark has been able to adopt many of these policies, and it has culminated with the rise of the Social Democratic Party within the late 20th century. And then of course they adopted very similar socialistic ideals, such as high work, single-payer healthcare, and the idea of paying students to go to college. And then this permeates specifically into work with a high work participation, as opposed to the general consensus of the idea of socialism, where there's a lack of work. There's actually a very high work rate participation, and then we can see that an emphasis is put on the right and work of duty for everyone, so that essentially they're encouraging essentially what needs to be done. And then, unfortunately, the idea of bullying is very relevant in the idea of Denmark, and we can see that, while on occasion they're certainly very effective in seeing the necessary physical and psychosomatic effects, but many people do not want to actually report it. And then for certain ethics, there are ideas that help determine the productivity of jobs such as job demand, available resources, work engagement, and work clarity. Of course, the idea of efficiency, it comes.
Keep going.
Oh, okay, I can. Okay, so things such as job demand and available resources are obviously productive in developing their actual success and satisfaction within the workplace, as opposed to work engagement, which has a strong positive association along with the idea of developing the continuity and wanting to stay at a certain job to keep them interested, as well as full clarity, where there was the negative association with the full ambiguity and being not sure, like the idea of hierarchy or like social order. And moving on to efficiency, while it does seem that their cultures seem like too unique and that synchronism is not infallible, from an additional research, it found that countries, as they develop into a modern social culture, the adoption of technology and industrialization, they become more alike. So within innovation, countries can develop similar characteristics and traits that tend towards one single idea, which can come with the rise of globalization. And despite all the unique differences that I've talked about within my presentation, we can see that within these GDP graphs for their economic success, that they have been able to, in the long term, be very successful. So of course, with our conclusions, you should strive for a market culture and their practices. While it does not necessarily guarantee success by adopting such practices, it was very helpful. Consider the ethical treatment and for the employees and customer, so that's not only considering what the customer wants, but interpersonal relationships between boss and employee, and then employee to employee, such as bullying and the further effects, so that way we can develop the maximum productivity. And then that way you can encourage high work participation with developing other possible socialist ideals that can help engage and increase happiness within the general work populace, because that way you can gain for max profitability.
together that you didn't use in the long run, and why did you choose not to use it?
I had additional government effects, such as the idea of, within Japan, they were actually like encouraging research globally, essentially. And then I didn't necessarily touch on that because that would have more specific ideas within like spreading out around the world as opposed to Japan specifically. So I decided to leave that out. And then like other government decisions and ideas, specifically with America and Japan, that like don't necessarily intentionally affect the idea of the work culture. And then I also did some more research, like as in comparison to different workplaces, but I decided for my presentation to specifically stick with just the office space and like white collar work.
If you had more time, what additional perspectives or research would you conduct and include in your recommendation?
I would have included maybe some discrepancies between gender or class, something that would cause like such divide as we can see with with American culture, and then essentially make perhaps the reasons for causation for the idea of the salaryman, and then like the idea of like the cultural backlash, such as any necessarily the over competitiveness and then like that over